am Amy Vetter, and welcome to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. This valuable time is for you to pause in your day and go on your own self-journey. Discover the beliefs that are holding you back from living your best life at work and at home. Learn from the guests on this show as they share their inspirational stories on how they found ways to break internal beliefs that were no longer serving them. Because if you believe you can, you will. And our podcast begins now. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs, where I interview Susan Stutzel. She is passionate about freeing professional women from self-sabotaging goals and helping them build a life of purpose and balance. As a mindset and productivity coach, she helps her clients ditch overwhelm by finding their voice through the process of rebuilding habits and expectations so they can feel successful both professionally and at home. During this conversation, we talk about Susan's journey from starting in an agriculture farm in Iowa to finding her passion in accounting and becoming a CPA and auditor, and her pivots along the way in order to create a life that was aligned with her own values and mission, that she is living the life that she desires. If you like this episode, please like it, share it, subscribe to this podcast. We appreciate you listening to us. If you have any future suggestions for topics or guests, feel free to go to amyvetter.com and give us your suggestions. Enjoy my interview with Susan. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs. And today I'm with Susan Stutzel. And Susan, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'd love to. Thank you, Amy. It is so great to be here. My name is Susan Stutzel, and I am a CPA and leadership coach. I'm a founder of two different companies because I am a multi-passionate person. And so I've been a CPA for about 20 years and just recently delved into the coaching arena because there's just so much power there. And so in that, I love coaching CPAs and women in business.
Awesome. So, and I always love when you can merge together your passions. So would love to just start out to get to know you and the audience get to know you a little bit. So when you were a child, what did you want to be when you grew up?
A CPA.
You did.
I know that sounds so weird, but the funny thing is I grew up in a blue-collar farming home, and so we didn't have a lot of money, and I was really good at math. I was super shy, just really quiet, just kind of, wanted to blend into the background. But one day, I don't even remember where I was exactly, but somebody said, well, what are you going to be when you grow up? And I don't know. And they're like, well, you're really good at math, right? I'm like, yeah, I really enjoyed math. And they said, well, you should be a CPA. I'm like, okay, I don't even know what that is. Why? Well, because they use math and they make a lot of money. So I was like, dang, sold. That's all I need to know. I could do math every day and make a lot of money.
Right.
So I laugh now because I'm like, oh my gosh, as a CPA, like, that's why you did it? Seriously?
Right, exactly. So where did you grow up? What was the community?
Yeah, I actually grew up in Tipton, Iowa. It's a small town in eastern Iowa, and I actually still live there, which I was like that girl that was like, okay, I'm going CPA, I'm going big city, I'm getting out of here. But then I met the love of my life as a 16-year-old in high school, and I'm a 16-year-old now, so that's kind of like, oh my gosh, what was I doing? But we're still here, and we absolutely love it. So
that's amazing. So when did you have brothers and sisters, or what did your parents do?
Yeah, my parents were farmers, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom most of the time, though like there were different times in our childhood that she would go to work. And so looking back, I think it was probably because we needed the money. Like we just didn't, like we weren't starving, but we didn't have a lot. And so I remember kind of seeing work as something that like they had to do. I never saw anybody that was like, oh, I get to go to work. Here's what I do. And here's what I'm passionate about. It was always like this thing that took up all this time during the day.
Right.
And I remember even being young thinking, why do you go do this thing that you don't want to? And maybe it was a little childlike at the time, right? Like, shouldn't you love it? But even now, I do think that you should love what you do, and it is possible to love what you do. So I think that was just kind of the beginning of my journey to say, you know what, there's more, and I'm going to go find it.
So what kind of farming was it?
Agricultural. So we had animals at some times. They did mostly corn.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I grew up on a farm, but like you can ask me questions, I'll probably have no idea. I was so like I couldn't have been more disinterested in the farming community. I, had a dog and a cat at some point, and that was my extent of like animal care.
So they never really took you out into the farm to work in it.
No, not very much. I mean, once in a while we would have to do like we always had a really big garden. I kind of remember that and would do some things, but my parents were a little bit more of the mindset like just kind of stay out of our way, we'll get our stuff done. And so I don't think that I learned to do that much. Like I never really even like I mowed lawn a couple of times as a kid. But I didn't do that kind of stuff. Again, I think it was just kind of that like stay out of our way. My parents were very young parents, like definitely unplanned, very young pregnancies.
So how young were they when they had you?
My mom was 17 when
Oh,
she had
wow.
me, and I have an older brother.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so very, very young.
How
And I
much
think
older was your brother?
he's a year and a half older than I am. So yeah, they started young, and I think they just kind of didn't, they were just kind of doing the best they could with what they knew because they were kids, really.
Right. And how did they meet?
In high school.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's funny that you met your husband the same way.
I know, which is why when we met, I was like, oh, this ain't gonna work. Like we don't have
Right.
anything in common. I'm not meant to stay here, just so you know, right off.
Right.
But no.
And was your dad older or how old was he?
He's just a couple year or yeah, 2 or 3 years older than my mom. So a little bit older, but not much.
Okay. So I'm guessing that they grew up in that kind of farming. Like how did they get into it?
Yeah, definitely. It was kind of handed down. It was the family way. They were all farmers.
And so from what you're explaining, it doesn't sound like they were encouraging you to go into the farming industry.
No, not really. And it's interesting even to this day, like I have a lot of cousins and family members who like continued and like that's what they do. And I'm just kind of this like odd one out here that's like, no, not interested in this at all.
Yeah. So you said like they weren't very interested in what they were doing. So how did they give you any guidance, or was it pretty much you seeking out other avenues because you weren't interested?
Yeah, it really was me seeking out other avenues. Like I said, that person, and I don't even remember who it was, which is kind of funny because I was so young that like put this CPA idea in my head. And so it was like, okay, well, I'm going to figure that out. And my parents got divorced just before my teenage years. And so like, we already had this family that we weren't really close. We were all just kind of very different, doing our own thing. And then you add that in, and now we're split all these different ways. And, I was a preteen and then a teenager, kind of, helping pick up the slack and fill the gap with, when my parents were kind of doing their own thing. I have a younger brother and a younger sister that I was kind of helping them along. And so really it was kind of that I was like, okay, if you're going to figure this out, like you're on your own. They weren't the kind of parents that were like, hey, let me help you figure this out. I visited college campuses on my own. I applied to colleges. I applied for financial aid. Like I figured it out.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of that was just, like, this is what I want to do. So I'm going to go after it. And I think there was at least enough optimist in me to go, okay, I think it's possible. So let's just figure it out.
Yeah, I always find it interesting to look back at yourself at that age and you're like, how did I know to do that? And it wasn't, I was in a similar situation, just figuring out college and student loans and all of that. And I don't know that I ever thought there was another option. Like
Right.
that was just the way you if you wanted to do it, you had to figure it out.
Yes. Yeah. You do, you figure it out. And I look now and I'm like, oh my gosh, I help my kids with so much. And I do that.
I know.
I want to, and I love to, but sometimes I'm like, man, at your age, like I was picking up the groceries and cleaning the house
Yep.
and running my siblings around. Like, okay, maybe we need to add a little bit more responsibility to your daily job.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I had a moment with my son when we were actually going to orientation for college, and he was going to the same, I went to University of Cincinnati and he was going there for orientation. And I remember how like I had kind of walked up this hill to go to orientation by myself. And just when I got up there, I was like, oh, I'm going to change my life. Like I had this moment, right? Like over the stadium, I was looking over the stadium and everyone was there with their parents. And I noticed, but I didn't really notice because I just was focused, right?
Yeah.
And then, a couple years ago, I took my son to orientation and we happened to pass the same spot. And I was like, stop here. I need a picture. All of a sudden this like came over me and I was, kind of what you're explaining is you broke that pattern. You were there for him, and you didn't even like, this is the way it was supposed to be. Like you were supposed to be there and enjoying it together, not like it be such an individual thing.
Yeah, for sure. Oh my gosh, what a really cool story.
It was powerful in the moment. And, and I think those are the times in your life when you start noticing differences with your own children that you took notice of your own things you didn't want to repeat. Like I think some people will look at those experiences like, well, I had to do it myself, so you should do it yourself, versus like, well, no, I wanted it to be different and now I'm going to make it different for you. So it's always like that good observation that you're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. And then recognizing like, I love the independence that I have from that. But I also, so I also don't want to rob my kids of that. So it's like, I'm like, I'm here with you and to support you through this, but also trying to teach them like, okay, advocate for yourself first and, try some of this and let me show you and help you, because the other side is, kind of watching like, okay, here's how I do it. Like, yeah, I'm doing it all by myself. So you should too. Like, no, we also don't want to go so far the other way.
Right.
They're 30 years old and still at home and we're
right. Exactly. Yeah.
like
There's a balance for sure. Yeah. So let's, kind of you're in high school, I guess, deciding you want to be a CPA. Now you have this in your head. So I'm guessing you're researching it. How do you meet your future husband during that time?
So it was kind of a blind date.
Oh, okay.
Which seems strange because we live in a small town, but I was really good friends with someone who was dating his friend. And so of course she's like, oh, you got to go out, then we can double date. And I'm like, okay, well, I knew enough about him that like I was the cheerleader, I was in drama, I was like all involved in school. And he was more of the mindset of work and he was into cars. And I was like, oh, this ain't gonna work. Like we're not even gonna like each other. But you know what, you're my friend. So yeah, like I'll do this. And so we agreed to get set up and we actually met on my 16th birthday. And I remember he was like, why are you doing this on your birthday? Like, don't you have something more to do? I was like, oh, well, I was going to hang with my friend anyway, right? But it really just turned into like, he just listened and we would talk all hours of the night. And one of my favorite stories is he played adult baseball. So we were at the park like on a Friday night and we were sitting up in the curly slide. We crawled up into there and we're kind of just sitting up there and talking and looking at the stars. And he was talking about kind of his dream. And he's like, oh, someday I would love to just live out in the middle of nowhere and in Montana or somewhere. It's so beautiful. And I'm in my head going, oh no, I'm going to Chicago or a big city and I'm going to be like top of the CPA firm. And so I'm, in my head, I'm going, well, this ain't going to work. But I shared with him, like, this is what I want to do. And I was just like, oh my gosh, what are we doing? But yet we just had that connection because we could talk. And, with all that I was going through with my family being such a mess, like he listened and his family was very different, but yet he kind of met me where I was and was just a support for me from the beginning, which at 16, I don't know that I really recognized, but yeah, it was amazing.
That's such a great story. So how did you reconcile that? So I'm assuming you went away to college.
I went to college, but locally. So it was only like 45 minutes away
Okay.
from my hometown. So I went to college locally, and yeah, we stayed together through that, and actually got married about halfway through college. When I was 21, he was 25, and I was known as the married girl in college. So, because I went to a private college, so it was pretty small, and most of the students there, like parents were paying for college, were that, kind of typical college story that
Right.
we hear of. And here I am, not only, figuring it all out on my own, paying for it on my own, figuring all that out. Now I'm also known as the married girl, right? So I was different on so many levels. But then I started my career with RSM, which also was local. So, kind of starting that career locally. And it wasn't
As auditor, tax, what?
audit. Yeah.
Okay.
And they let me dive into tax a little bit, which was
Mhm.
awesome because I wanted to try both. And so that was a really great opportunity, and very shortly discovered that I am an auditor all the way. Don't make me do tax returns ever.
Yeah.
But yeah, we never really had that moment that it was like, okay, where are we going to live? Like we just kind of kept moving forward, and stayed where we were, and it was great. And I think we both recognized that, to this day, like we're in the right place because, like I said, his family is very close. It's so wonderful now that we have children to be so close to them because they're such an important part of our kids' lives. And I don't know, it's probably been about 5 years ago. My son is very much an outdoorsman. And one day he said to me, "This is the best place on earth to grow up." And
Aw.
I was just like, oh, okay, we've got it. So we live on 15 acres out in the country that's all wooded. And so, Troy got a little bit of his out in the middle of nowhere, but yet I'm not very far from a city. So where we're at, we're like within 5 hours of Chicago, Minneapolis, Kansas City, lots of places. And so I think we know that, we may not be here forever, but for right now, this is definitely where we're supposed to be. So
Yeah. And I think what I'd like to understand is kind of your career at RSM and how you got that into alignment when you're talking about how important family is. Because when you start out as an auditor, your hours are horrible, and so forth. So what was that experience for you, getting into audit?
yeah, so I got into it and I loved it. And I will
What
also
did you love about it?
I loved the teamwork and the camaraderie that we developed as an audit team that would, go out on audits. I loved the work. I loved working with the clients and that relationship building, because I went from like this really super shy girl, and all of a sudden I'm doing this thing that I love, and I'm like, dang, I got to talk to people like all day long, and I got to like show up like I know what I'm talking about. And so I had some really great mentors that now I think it's such more formal process. But at the time, looking back, like I had a couple really great people that really kind of led the way and showed me the way, but then also said, okay, now that you watched me do it, now it's your turn, and kind of stepped into some of that confidence and built that, as I walked along. But also at the beginning of my career, I'm looking back on, my parents divorced, my family was a mess. I kind of helped raise my siblings. So by the time I graduated from high school, like I was done having kids. Like I even said to my husband, like, I'm a career girl. I don't think that, kids are really in my future.
Right.
And he kind of was like, okay, like, all right, we'll see what this looks like, and was very patient. And then, of course, that changed many years later, but I was a little slow. So yeah, at the beginning, it was like, no, this career thing is great because I'm not the family girl. I'm not worried about trying to balance that at this point. That
Hmm.
definitely came later.
Yeah, I relate to so many things that you're saying. Was in a similar situation where I was responsible a lot for my two brothers, and that gets overwhelming. So you get scared to go into that next phase of like, oh my gosh, am I going to have to go through all of that again? And, it's not like the new parent feel probably that most people have. But again, I think the positive of it, just like you were saying before, of, your independence and so forth, like, how you want to parent, very differently, because
Right.
of what you experienced.
Yeah. And I remember when I was in high school, I worked part-time at a bank, and one of the loan officers there, he was like, don't give up on kids yet. Like, don't make that decision yet. He's like, raising someone else's kids or, your siblings. He's like, it's not the same. There's nothing like being a parent. And I was kind of like, yeah, okay, sure. But he was so sincere. And,
Right.
I look back and I'm like, all right, he kind of planted a seed that, it's maybe not what I've made it up to be in my head.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that I think is important, when you're kind of trying to figure out your path, and I like that you brought up about, now mentorship is seen as such a formal process, but it really doesn't have to be. Like, you can be looking up to mentors that never even know you're looking up to them.
Yeah.
That you're following, things that they're doing because it inspires you and it kind of gives you ideas of what you want to do in your life. So, it, and asking people for their help is really important as well. So when you were talking about those people that kind of took you under their wing, was that you asking that you needed that help? Did they see you needed that help? Where was it that they came into your life?
Yeah, it was not I never asked anything. I think part of it was, just a connection that we made. And then it also became, because I ended up doing a lot of the nonprofit organization audits at RSM. And so the team and the partner that oversaw a lot of those, it really just happened naturally. It wasn't, I didn't ask, they didn't seek me out. It just was a natural kind of personality fit. And I think they were just kind of leaders, they were just born leaders or created leaders for where they were, and willing to raise up, kind of that next generation, and kind of helped me along the way. And when I saw that, I was like, okay, I've always been kind of that like learner and figure it out. And so I just remember just kind of watching, going, okay, that's how they're doing it. Okay, I think I can do that, just watch enough times and then practice and, kind of screw it up or talk to the client and don't know what to say next. But, just figuring it out as I went. And it really just kind of took practice. But yeah, nothing formal about it for sure.
Yeah. And I think it's an important point as a leader as well, to be seeking out where you can help people. It doesn't have to be that the organization tapped you to do it,
Right.
that you are looking for, who you can help shape, especially in how you describe yourself. When you are a hard worker, you care, you're willing to do things, to learn, really allowing those people the freedom to try new things and to give them those opportunities is so important, rather than letting them flail, to the side as well. Because I think what's hard, especially in the accounting profession, is everyone's so busy, it's hard for people to look up and look around them. And as you get to different levels in the organization, it really should be less and less about your work and how you're helping others grow. So when you started growing in your career, how did you see that evolve for yourself?
Yeah. I think because of the benefit that I saw from that, then I was like, okay, I can do that. Like then would kind of seek out others. And so maybe they were doing it more intentionally than I really understood at the time. But I loved that. And I recognized like how far that brought me and how quickly it did by them, planting that and saying, okay, now you try it. And so I definitely have sought that out, and always, I mean, I still am looking, and I think that's a really just great value in leaders to really, like you said, recognize that and say, okay, like here's where I'm at now. I can pull someone else along. I can help someone else along by encouraging them and just kind of seeing that potential and then encouraging them to really step into that.
Yeah. So where did you decide to make a switch in your career or pivot?
Yeah. Well, I've made a lot of pivots, really. I was at RSM for only a few years, and a lot of my friends at the time were leaving and going to industry. And they're like, oh my gosh, it's so great. You know, the corner office, no more weekends, no more busy season. And so I kind of fell into that and I was like, okay, well, I'm going to give it a shot. And there was this opportunity at a small client that I worked for to step into a role with them. And kind of felt like the right time. So I did that. I stepped into that. And within, I don't know, 6 months, like I had like cleaned up all their accounting. It was an accounting position, but it also involved some office management. And I very quickly learned about myself. Okay, you're great at accounting, but please don't make me do any HR work. Like I figure out insurance policies, just don't make me. And so it was a learning journey to go, okay, you stepped into this thing that so many other people love and it does not fit right.
Yeah. And it's important to know what you don't want to do.
Yes. And sometimes you just have to try it, right?
Right.
Like
And not feel bad about it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was definitely a step to go, okay, well, either you recognize you failed and you go back, or you look for something different. And I mean, it was hard because I thought, gosh, I've worked so hard to build a resume, to build myself. What if I look like a failure already and I leave right away and but I thought, you know what, I've got to try. And I did. I learned it wasn't for me. So I switched and I went to a Fortune 500 company. So I still didn't go back to public accounting yet, but I went to a bigger organization where there was opportunities for growth within, to go up, to go lateral. And that was great. So I was like, okay, now I'm surrounded again by lots of CPAs, but also non-CPAs, and growing, working within this organization. But then again, I learned something about myself that in industry, it's a very cyclical process. Like it was very much week 1 of the month, you do this, week 2 of the month, you do this, week 3, and so on. And while it was great and they always provided challenging opportunities, it was like, okay, this is too cyclical. I miss the client interaction. I miss, the different things that come and that come up. And so once again, here I am going, oh my gosh, really, you're going to switch again. But an opportunity came up at a smaller CPA firm, and they were looking for someone to head up their audit department. And I was like, okay, like that's for me. I'm not going to have to do any tax still because I have to make sure I don't ever get in that role. And so I took on this job, and in the interview, actually, I don't remember how it came up, but I didn't really prepare for it. But they were like, okay, so we were coming up on tax season, and they're like, so we typically work all day on Saturdays. And, it had been 5 years since I'd worked in a CPA firm. So I was like, I don't work on Saturdays. And I was like, I just said that out loud. But I had a newborn baby. I had a 2.5-year-old. And I thought, no way, I ain't working weekends.
Right.
And it never occurred to me that, oh my gosh, you're applying at a CPA firm. They're going to think you're going to work on the weekends.
Right.
And they kind of all paused. I think there were 3 or 4 partners in the room. And they kind of looked at each other and went, well, if you're not doing taxes, I guess you probably don't have to.
No one had ever stopped their line of thinking before.
No. So I was like, oh my gosh. So part of me was like, okay, you just destroyed the interview. Like they ain't going to hire you.
Right.
But on the other hand, I was like, I'm so glad that I said that, because I would have gone in at the salary they gave me, and I would have assumed I'm not working weekends, and they would have assumed that I was.
Right. Exactly.
So I thought, okay, well, you know what? Here I am. And I just am kind of somebody that just shows up as I am. So here's what you get. You don't get weekends.
Yeah.
And it worked out great. And like I said, it was kind of the biggest interview blunder ever, but yet it worked out perfectly.
So how did you then, once you were in, because I think that's one of the hardest things, is a lot of people set up flexible arrangements or part-time arrangements, and then the boundaries start getting gray. And a lot of, especially women that set these things up, like what I'll hear them say a lot is like, I worked when I wasn't supposed to work, but I don't want to lose my schedule. I don't want to lose, what they gave me. But when you really look back at it, you've already lost it for the year because of how much extra time you ended up, and then you're not being paid for it because, and so forth. So how did you manage that to make sure that you could still prioritize what was important to you and keep the career you wanted?
Yeah, that's always a challenge. And so, I was, supposed to head up this audit department and grow it. And so first it was great, right? And then it was a lot more traveling, and not like overnight travel, but longer days, and, inching into the weekends, and with, two little ones at home and not a lot of sleep. And I mean, we, all of us parents know how much time little ones take. It just was kind of this thing that expounded and
Without noticing.
that it just kind of inches and inches, and then all of a sudden. And so it was kind of, I had that moment that it was like, I am exhausted and I'm trying to grow this thing. And then in the meantime, the firm kind of made a decision they were going to kind of take this, different route. And I was like, I don't want to do this. And, the opportunity for partner was coming up, and I'm like, I don't want to be partner here. What am I doing? So I'm exhausted and kind of killing myself. But at the same time, it's like, this isn't actually what I want to do. And so that was when I first started working with a coach. And it was like, how do I do this? Like, look at my resume. I've switched and switched and switched. How do I start over again? What do I do now? And that was the moment that it was like, if you want a CPA firm that works with the clients you want, when you want, how else do you do that but on your own? So I decided to step out and start my own practice, which was exciting and terrifying. But my husband was 100% behind me. It was like where I lacked the confidence in it, he was like, oh, I know you can do this. I have no doubt. So it was like, he kind of gave me that extra lift that I needed. I was like, all right, then let's do this. And so now I've got, two little ones at home, and I'm starting my own practice with 0 clients, right? It's not like I have a tax practice where I could, build a set of clients on the side. It was 0. But it just was just an opportunity for me to really dive into that network that I had built over the years and the people that I had met. So I reached out and said, hey, here's what I'm doing. Let me know if you know of anything. And just naturally and organically, clients started calling, which was awesome. And so then that, really further develops confidence to go, wow, somebody believed in me enough to refer someone to me. And then that expounded and was so great, because I could kind of really control my schedule and control not only the clients that I was working with that really lit me up and I was excited about, and not have to do all the other things and projects that I wasn't interested in, and really be able to focus on my family when I was at home. And so finding that balance, but always a daily struggle of decisions and being intentional in what we do and how we use our time.
Yeah. And I think your story is unique, because I would say, even for myself, starting my own practice or consulting with people about it, what happens is you start taking in whatever clients because you want money. And getting the practice started, and you end up with clients that maybe you wouldn't have chosen later on, or that don't pay well, or you end up working more hours that you intended because you own the business and it's all on your shoulders. So maybe you can give some advice of how you were able to be so intentional, or when you noticed you getting off track and how you got back to that.
Yeah, it's really, and it's so true. And I will attribute that to amazing people that I had in my path. And so, looking back at all of the different positions that I had, dabbled in and tried and taken, but yet I really am a learner at heart. So I chose from each of those to kind of learn from that. And in that, like when I set out, like I knew that I wanted to work with small nonprofit organizations. And I also knew enough about myself to know that I don't want to be that CPA firm that kind of knows a little bit about everything.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know what I know, and I will refer away everything else. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was just kind of the decision that I had made to say, I'm going to stay narrowly focused. And yes, that means saying no to money that might come along. And there were opportunities for things that I turned away. But there was also someone along the way that said, just be careful who your clients are. And I took that to heart and thought, okay, well, that lines up with my thoughts on really staying focused. Because yeah, there were some big projects that came along that people are like, oh, hey, do you have the capacity to do this? Because we don't as a firm. And I could have taken it and it would have been, great money. But I'm
Right.
like, no, that's not really my specialty. And so just it's too much risk. So of course, the CPA in me says, well, let's be a little risk averse.
Yeah.
And so that really did help me stay focused and do what I do. And also, again, just kind of developed the confidence in me to say, I know what I know, and everything else I can refer you to somebody who knows better. And I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, that's really great advice. And I think it's really important that we aren't afraid to have that space for the right client instead of if you take it up with the wrong client,
Yeah,
then the right client comes along and you don't have time for them.
right.
So it's really important
Yeah.
to do that. So talk about, where your business went and how you got into eventually wanting to coach yourself.
Yeah. So my CPA practice was predominantly auditing at the start. And so all that compliance work that, has to be done, and they don't really, it's not that they love being audited, but they have to have it. But my favorite part of that was really the relationships that I built, with the executive directors, with the board, as I would present, audit reports to them. And I learned over time that my favorite conversations were really those ones that were, digging into, the long-term vision for the organization, or where they wanted to grow, or, how their board needed, kind of some support or some development. And the number of people that are on nonprofit boards that really don't understand financial statements,
Mm-hmm.
but that I could come in and they would be like, oh my gosh, we've never had an auditor really explain it to us in a way that we understood. And so I was like, okay, there's something here to be said, right? So I found myself doing a lot more training and a lot more just asking questions because I'm curious, and even talking to some of the accountants and executive directors, like, what really gets you excited and what do you see yourself doing? And then walking away going, okay, well, that didn't have anything to do with the audit, but oh my gosh, that was so exciting. I can't believe this person wants to start, this whole new segment of the nonprofit or whatever.
Right.
So then it was like, okay, well, wait a minute. So I'm getting paid for this thing over here, but I'm really excited about this thing over here. So again, working with a coach, dug into that a little bit and went, okay, I know the power of coaching because I'm the product of it and I've seen it work and I've seen it be powerful. And what I'm doing is very similar because I'm curious and I'm asking questions and, encouraging them to do things. Like I would even follow up like, 3 months later and be like, hey, did you do that thing you said you were going to do? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm holding people accountable that like they didn't ask me to. I don't know if I should ask them about that. Maybe that's not a great idea. But really discovered that I have a passion for coaching before like I really even knew what coaching was and could be. So decided to get my executive coaching certificate about 3 years ago. And now I'm able to do both. So I still can focus my nonprofit or my CPA firm on small nonprofits, continue to, and even segueing that a little bit more into board development and some of that learning gap that some of them are missing, or the strategic planning that they don't always, have time for or make room for. But on the coaching side, I get really excited about helping women really find that balance and find what really lights them up. I think because going back all the way to when I was a kid and watching adults go through this life that they didn't love, like I believe that you can have the career and have the family and love every single day. And is it perfect? No. And is it messy? Yes, but it's possible. And so that's where I focus my coaching efforts, to just kind of open up that possibility and help provide that pathway.
Yeah. And you can see so much of how that's strung through your background of like seeing people who didn't enjoy their work or their life.
Yeah.
And now you wanting to spread that you can, you know, with that passion, right? Like, cause you can see the other side. You know, it reminds me, I did a podcast probably over a year ago with a psychologist, Dr. Keith Bernardo, but he was talking about something similar that his father, when he was 12 or 13, sat him down. His father had this near death experience. And when he came back, he sat Keith and his sister down and said, you know, who are you? And Keith's like, I'm a football player. And he's like, well, what do you like about football? Well, I love, you know, getting touchdowns or, you know, whatever he said. And they said, well, what do you like about getting touchdowns? Well, I love to see how the plays work and the strategy to get there. So he's like, so you're curious. And I think it's really important, like what's strung through your story and where we go wrong a lot of times is we define ourselves by titles or the career objective instead of like who we are. You're a learner, you're curious. And if you get a job that is not aligned with being curious and learning, and you're in maintenance mode, like you said, with one of your jobs, then you're off balance and you're not happy. And so it's just really getting to that, you know, your soul of, you know, what makes you you so that you can make sure the work you do aligns with your soul.
Yeah, so true. I love that. And it's really discovering what gets you excited and then do that. Yeah, when that's in alignment, like it's really about the choices that we make. Like you have a choice to either figure it out if you don't know what it is, or make the choice to, yeah, go in a direction that really aligns with who you are. I love that.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's also important too is as we go through life, you know, it's always interesting hearing people's stories because you don't know by your outside appearance, you went through that with your family and so forth. And there's a choice to make in life of, do I blame my past and my experiences and just carry that through my life? Or do I break from that and say, it can be possible. I can break from this. It's going to be work. It's going to be hard. And I'll figure it out. But I'm not going to blame that for my life circumstances. And that's a really hard choice to make in life.
Yeah, it can be, but so true. I mean, it's about the choices, and we can either live out that life that we've been given, right? And maybe it's great and maybe it's not, or we can choose something different. And I think also the power of people in our lives that plant that seed for the possibility of something different, and being able to really go after it. I think that's important. And I've seen that, like my daughter, because of the life that I've lived, like she believes she can do anything.
Right.
And I'm like, yes, okay.
Well, and also because of your husband, you believed you could do
Yes.
this,
Right.
so I think a lot of times, especially with women, we don't necessarily speak up to the people around us. And you were very clear from the moment you met him, like, this is like, I care about my career. I care,
Yeah.
but a lot of women don't necessarily do that. Or when the next best thing comes in their career, they really need to ask for help in order to take that job. Like what is the family going to shift? How are we going to make sacrifice to do it? And is this what we want to do as a family?
Right.
But you can't, a lot of times we'll reject the opportunity versus have the communication and the discussion of what's needed.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it can be hard. I mean, go to your husband and say, hey, you want to quit your job? And
Yeah.
see what happens.
Yeah. Exactly. So I like to end with just some rapid fire questions. So pick a category: family and friends, money, spiritual, or health.
Family and friends.
Okay. Things or actions that I don't have that I want.
That I would say more authentic relationships with my family.
Okay. Things or actions I do have that I want.
An amazing marriage and amazing kids.
Things or actions that I don't have that I don't want.
Fake relationships. Some of my family relationships are a bit on the surface level and fake because they
Yeah.
don't really like authenticity. So
Yeah. And then it's just not an enjoyable experience.
so no more fake for me.
Yeah. Things or actions that I do have that I don't want.
I still would say some of the limiting beliefs. I think that I've broken a lot of that because as I see my daughter, but there's definitely still things that I struggle with. And so still working on that.
So I really appreciate you sharing your story. I think there were so many takeaways for people, but is there anything we didn't discuss that you want to make sure people take away from this conversation?
Yeah, I think just that you really do have the power of choice, and making the choices in our lives can completely change your life if you really live and step into that. So I encourage just everyone out there to find their voice and really dig into who they are so that they can live out the life, and I believe that we should all have a life that we love.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today on this conversation, and I appreciate you sharing your story.
Thanks for having me.
And now for my mindful moments with my interview from Susan. There were so many pivots along the way in Susan's journey that were great learnings for all of us as we think about the life that we started and the journey we take throughout our career and throughout the changes in our life as well. And the things that we learn along the way. And one of the things that was really interesting about her story was the story about her parents being farmers and her realizing that her parents didn't love the work that they did. And there really was a lot of disinterest in the work that they did. And from a young age, she really tried to seek out what would create excitement for her, what would make her excited about a life and a career in her future. And I think what was really important is the learning piece of Susan. And we talked about in this interview of really understanding your soul and what's important to you. And throughout her story, she was seeking out information, whether it was watching others, taking advice from others, and balancing it with what excited her. And when she was told at a young age she was good at math and she could have a more financially stable career as a CPA, she immediately focused on that as her future profession. And many of us don't necessarily think about what started our path in our careers. And a lot of times it's from a friend or family member that had been a CPA or an accountant, or we are told that we're good at math, or we do know it's a secure career. But once we get into it, it's really important to seek out what interests us. And I think what's so amazing about the accounting profession is there's so many avenues to go in. And it's really important to know what doesn't fit with you versus what does. And that we don't have to be perfect at everything. And too many times I think because of our personalities, we will feel like it's a weakness if maybe corporate accounting isn't aligning with us versus when we're meeting with clients as an auditor, or that we're not as good at tax, but auditing is something that we do find a strong suit, instead of looking at it and saying that there's people for every type of job. And even narrowing it in further when she talked about the types of clients that she loved to work with were not-for-profit clients, and really honing into that. And I think there's always this fear that if we don't do everything or take everything on that's requested of us, that we're failing the people around us, or we have this fear that we won't be successful. But as she demonstrated in her career as well, that it actually has brought the boundaries and the balance and the alignment to her values to be very focused and intentional about the types of clients that she works with, about what she loved about the work that she did, whether there's teamwork, whether there's curiosity and learning, along the way, that you're not getting complacent. And by observing what those traits are in you, it actually leads your journey in your career to now she has a practice where she's coaching and asking more questions and helping with strategy. So being observant of your journey along the way is really important, and not being hard on yourself, whether you are changing jobs or changing the things that you do, because the important thing is that you watch and learn not only other people, but you observe yourself as a learner to see the things that really create passion for you, and making sure that you're not afraid to make the choices that will help you live the life that you desire. So finding your voice and stepping into your truth is really important, without feeling like there's something wrong with doing that or that it's selfish. That instead, really stepping back and observing yourself and knowing what's right and what's wrong and feeling that in your body and having that awareness can help make sure that your life is the one that you want to live every day, and you find that happiness so that the energy you create is the right energy for the people around you. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. I hope you will take a moment to pause before entering back into your day to reflect on this podcast and note 1 to 2 actions you are inspired to do from today's conversation that you could incorporate into your life. To read the full blog and listen back to this episode or any other, you can find them at www.amyvetter.com/Breaking Beliefs podcast and related videos on my YouTube channel. For daily inspiration, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Amy Vetter CPA. I hope that you will choose to like this and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and more, so that you can join us for more inspiration on our next episode.